The United Kingdom has just issued the most frightening alarm in decades. The world's fifth largest economy is teetering on the brink of a financial precipice that could drag millions of people into an unprecedented crisis. As you watch this video, historic decisions are being made in Westminster that will determine the future of entire generations. Subscribe to the channel now and leave a comment. Do you believe the UK will be able to avoid this collapse? Your opinion matters in this crucial discussion that affects the entire global economic system. The pound sterling, once an untouchable symbol of British power, is swaying dangerously in international markets. London traders, tensely staring at their multiple screens, watch every exchange rate movement with an anxiety not seen since the 2008 financial crisis. City trading rooms, traditionally brimming with arrogant confidence, now echo with worried whispers about currency hedging and capital protection strategies. The confidence that sustained centuries of British financial dominance appears to be evaporating like morning mist over the Thames. The latest data paints an alarming picture that economists are struggling to interpret. British GDP growth stagnated completely in the last quarter, marking 0.0% economic expansion. This figure isn't just a cold statistic in government reports. It represents thousands of businesses closing their doors, families struggling to pay basic bills, and an entire generation of young people facing an increasingly uncertain future. Traditional shopping streets in cities like Manchester, Birmingham, and Leeds are showing increasing numbers of empty storefronts, silent witnesses to an economy losing its vitality. Inflation continues to erode British people's purchasing power with relentless veracity. Although it has retreated from the stratospheric double-digit peaks seen in 2022, prices remain stubbornly high, putting a painful strain on household budgets. A shopping cart that cost £50 3 years ago now easily consumes £80 or more. Basic products like bread, milk, eggs, and meat have soared in price, turning routine purchases into agonizing math exercises for millions of working families. The British middle class, the historical backbone of the country's social stability, is being squeezed between rising costs and wages that don't keep up with inflation. The Bank of England finds itself in an impossible position that no central banker in the world envies. Keeping interest rates high to combat inflation means further suffocating an already shaky economy. Companies that rely on credit for working capital face unsustainable financing costs. Small businesses, from family-run coffee shops to decades-old construction companies, are withering under the weight of interest rates that have tripled in less than 2 years. On the other hand, cutting rates prematurely could reignite the inflationary flames that have devastated the recent economy, creating an even more destructive vicious cycle. Britain's public debt has reached levels that would make Victorian economists turn in their graves. The government is spending over £100 billion annually just on interest payments on this colossal debt. This astronomical amount actually exceeds the entire budget of the Ministry of Defense, and honestly, could fully fund the public health system for months. Every pound spent on interest is a pound that doesn't go to schools, hospitals, infrastructure, or any productive investment that could stimulate real economic growth. The country is trapped in a debt trap where borrowing to pay off old debts has become the unsustainable norm. The British labor market presents baffling contradictions that confound seasoned analysts. While official statistics show relatively low unemployment rates, millions of working-age Britons have simply disappeared from the workforce. Approximately 9 million working-age people are neither working nor actively seeking work. Many cite long-term health problems, particularly mental health conditions, which have exploded after the pandemic. This invisible army of economically inactive people represents wasted productive capacity that the British economy desperately needs but seemingly cannot mobilize. The public health system, a source of national pride and a pillar of the British social contract, is literally in a permanent state of emergency. The National Health Service faces waiting lists of over 7 million people awaiting treatment. Patients wait for hours in ambulances parked outside overcrowded hospitals, unable to transfer their cases to already overflowing emergency rooms. Overworked staff work grueling shifts in dilapidated facilities with outdated equipment. Qualified doctors and nurses are emigrating to countries offering better conditions and pay, draining critical talent that takes years to develop. The gradual collapse of the NHS is not just a health crisis. It is a visceral symptom of the deterioration of British state capacity. The manufacturing sector, already shrunken after decades of deindustrialization, faces further devastating blows. British exports to the European Union, its largest trading partner, remain significantly below pre-Brexit levels. New bureaucratic barriers, customs costs, and border delays have turned once fluid trade routes into frustrating logistical obstacles. Manufacturing companies that relied on integrated European supply chains have been forced to reorganize entire operations, absorbing enormous costs that erode already tight profit margins. Many have simply relocated production within the European Union, taking jobs and investment with them. The British housing market, traditionally a driver of wealth and stability for the middle class, is in worrying turmoil. Property prices have fallen in many regions for the first time in over a decade. Families who bought homes at the peak of the market now face negative equity, owing more on their mortgages than their properties are worth. Mortgage rates have soared to levels that make buying a first home an impossible dream for most young people. The rental market offers little relief, with rent consuming ever-increasing percentages of disposable income. The British housing crisis has transformed from a social problem into an existential threat for an entire generation. The financial services sector, historically the jewel in Britain's economic crown, is losing its competitive luster. Frankfurt, Paris, Amsterdam, and Dublin have steadily attracted financial firms and high-skilled jobs that previously called London home. Global banks have relocated operations and staff to maintain easier access to the European single market. The City of London still maintains considerable influence, but its unquestioned dominance is gradually being eroded. Each major institution moving operations represents not only lost jobs but also tax revenue that the British government desperately needs to balance its unsustainable fiscal accounts. Investments in critical infrastructure have been repeatedly delayed or cancelled as the government struggles to control spending. Essential rail projects that would connect economically depressed regions to centers of prosperity have been cut. Energy modernization plans necessary for the clean energy transition remain underfunded. Digital infrastructure in rural areas remains, well, inadequate for the demands of the modern economy. This lack of productive investment creates a vicious cycle where the lack of infrastructure impedes economic growth, which in turn limits resources for infrastructure investment. The United Kingdom is essentially eating its seed corn, consuming existing capital without adequately investing in the future. Regional inequalities in the United Kingdom have reached levels that threaten national cohesion itself. London and the southeast of England maintain relative prosperity, concentrating economic opportunities and investment. Meanwhile, former industrial regions in northern England, Wales, and parts of Scotland face continued economic decline. Talented young people from these areas are forced to migrate south in search of opportunities, further draining human capital from already impoverished regions. This north-south divide is not just an abstract economic disparity, but a source of deep political resentment that fuels populism and social fragmentation. Entire communities feel abandoned by an economic system that seems to exclusively benefit a distant metropolitan elite. The British education system, once a global model of excellence, faces increasing pressures that compromise its quality. Public schools are grappling with budget cuts that result in overcrowded classes, overworked teachers, and eliminated extracurricular programs. Universities are facing financial crises as tuition fees remain frozen, while operating costs rise inexorably. British academic research, historically globally competitive, has lost access to important European funding programs. Students graduate with massive student debt in an economy offering increasingly precarious job prospects. The country is at risk of sacrificing its greatest long-term asset, an educated and highly skilled population capable of competing in the global knowledge economy. British companies face a perfect storm of simultaneous challenges that test even the most resilient managers. Energy costs have remained high for prolonged periods, making British manufacturing less competitive internationally. Labor shortages in critical sectors such as agriculture, hospitality, and logistics create frustrating operational bottlenecks. Post-Brexit regulations have increased bureaucratic complexity without offering clear offsetting benefits for most businesses. Reduced access to skilled workers from the European Union has forced companies to compete fiercely for scarce talent, driving up wage costs just as other pressures are already squeezing margins. Many companies respond by cutting investment, freezing hiring, or simply operating in survival mode rather than growth mode. The British welfare system is under unprecedented strain that threatens its fundamental sustainability. Millions of families rely on government benefits to supplement inadequate wages or replace lost income. The universal credit system, revamped a few years ago, faces widespread criticism for underpayments and, well, Kafkaesque bureaucracy. Food banks, which were virtually unknown in the UK 15 years ago, now serve millions of meals every month in one of the world's richest economies. This growing reliance on charity for basic needs really reveals the profound failure of the social contract that was supposed to guarantee a minimum level of dignity to all citizens. Politicians debate reforms, but the political will to significantly increase social support often clashes with the brutal fiscal realities of a government already deeply in debt. Business confidence has plummeted to levels historically associated with deep and prolonged recessions. Surveys of managers and directors reveal pervasive pessimism about the short and medium-term economic outlook. This pessimism is not merely an abstract sentiment, it actually translates into concrete decisions to postpone investments, cancel expansions, and reduce inventories. When companies collectively decide to wait and see rather than invest and grow, the entire economy slows down in a self-fulfilling prophecy. The vicious cycle of low confidence leading to lower investment, which results in weaker growth, which in turn further erodes confidence, is extremely difficult to break without dramatic and coordinated policy intervention. The retail sector, a sensitive barometer of the health of the consumer economy, reports results ranging from disappointing to, frankly, alarming. Retail sales grew minimally or even contracted when adjusted for inflation, indicating that consumers are buying fewer real goods despite spending more nominal pounds. Large traditional chain stores, unable to compete with e-commerce giants and facing rising operating costs, regularly announce branch closures. Suburban shopping centers, once bustling with activity, increasingly feature empty stores and reduced customer traffic. This transformation is not only inevitable digital disruption, but also a reflection of increasingly cautious consumers who prioritize basic needs over discretionary purchases. The retail contraction eliminates jobs in a sector that traditionally absorbed workers with varying levels of skills. Demographic prospects add another layer of complexity to Britain's economic challenges. The population is aging rapidly, with increasing proportions of retirees relying on decreasing proportions of active workers. This demographic imbalance simultaneously puts pressure on pension and healthcare systems while reducing workforce growth. The state pension system faces long-term funding shortfalls that will require politically painful reforms or substantial tax increases. Private pension schemes, many of which were already inadequate, have suffered significant investment losses during the recent market volatility. Millions of Britons face the prospect of less comfortable retirements than previous generations, reversing decades of social and economic progress. The United Kingdom's position in global trade is being fundamentally reassessed, and, honestly, the outcome is not favorable. The country no longer enjoys the advantages of belonging to the world's largest trading bloc. Negotiations for bilateral trade agreements with other nations have, so far, yielded only modest results that do not compensate for lost access to European markets. British products now face tariffs and non-tariff barriers in markets where they previously circulated freely. Exporters report complex processes and additional costs that, frankly, make their offerings less competitive. Importers face increased bureaucracy and delays that disrupt meticulously optimized supply chains. This additional trade friction, well, it represents a permanent cost to the economy, continually reducing efficiency and productivity. The British government bond market, which was traditionally considered among the safest in the world, has experienced turbulence that has shaken its centuries-old reputation. The traumatic episode of September 2022, when poorly planned fiscal announcements triggered massive sell-offs in British gilts, remains vivid in investors' memories. Although markets have stabilized since then, a layer of distrust remains. Investors now demand higher risk premiums to hold British debt, reflecting heightened perceptions of fiscal risk and questionable economic governance. These higher borrowing costs ripple through the economy, making it more expensive for businesses and consumers to access credit. The loss of fiscal credibility is easy to suffer, but honestly, extremely difficult to recover. British energy companies are navigating an extraordinarily volatile environment that, frankly, challenges any long-term planning. Energy prices, while having retreated from the extreme peaks of 2022, remain significantly elevated by historical comparison. Households face heating and electricity bills that consume increasing portions of their budgets, forcing impossible choices between heating their homes and other basic needs. The government intervened with massive subsidies during the worst moments of the crisis, but these programs were temporary and added tens of billions to the public debt. The transition to renewable energy, which is urgently needed for environmental reasons, requires colossal infrastructure investments that the country struggles to finance amid current fiscal pressures. The British automotive sector, once a symbol of industrial renaissance, now faces multiple existential uncertainties. The global transition to electric vehicles requires massive investment in new technologies and production lines. Established UK manufacturers must decide whether to invest billions in modernization or relocate production to more attractive locations. The government offers incentives, but competitors across Europe and Asia often offer more generous packages. The British automotive supply chain, a complex network of hundreds of suppliers, depends on these automakers' decisions. Each factory closure or relocation represents not only direct job losses, but multiple indirect jobs in suppliers and support services. Entire communities built around automotive manufacturing face potential obsolescence if they